Hello, I'm Dan Cook with Bone Zone, and welcome to another edition of Ortho Innovators. This episode is sponsored by OMTech, the leading conference for industry leaders to make connections and access the expertise they need to advance their product development projects. This year's conference will take place June 9th to 11th in Chicago. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Orahn Priess-Bloom, founder and chief innovation officer at Ossio, which developed the groundbreaking OssioFiber technology and positioned itself at the forefront of developing fixation solutions that don't just stabilize bone, but actively participate in the healing process. Orahn, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So let's dive in. Just first, give me a little bit of background of your journey from studying biomechanics at Columbia University and how that background led to the founding of Ossio and the clinical need the company is addressing.
Yeah, absolutely. So way back in the early days, as a student, they had me running all these cadaver biomechanics tests, which I'm sure many medical students and biomedical engineering students can relate to. And as the surgeons would invent different types of surgeries, we would model them in the cadaver lab and test the strength of the fixation of the typically metal implants on the cadaver bone. And I was constantly struck by the damage that the implants were doing on the bone. Now, obviously, those problems are exacerbated in a cadaver environment, but nonetheless, the just raw hardness of that metal pounding away in the bone struck me, and I think sent me on this journey that eventually landed at Ossio.
Great. And, when you started the company, um, you focused your efforts on the foot and ankle space. Um, why were those applications important, and why is that part of the body challenging? And what was the thought process of addressing that area first?
Yeah, that's a great question because when you have a wonderful technology, it's always so attractive just to go anywhere and everywhere with it. And really, the first indications you choose are so important. So we were fortunate enough to be put in contact with a couple of foot and ankle surgeons, and they were just immediately taken with the technology. There's a lot of fusions that take part in foot and ankle surgery. And so the idea of having a bony bridge, which is essentially what Ossio is forming, was very, very attractive. So right off the bat, we knew that it was clinically compelling. But the big question as a small company is, well, can you actually get it to the docs? Do you have a distribution network? And in foot and ankle, as opposed to, for example, trauma, which can be very hard to access the surgeons from a distribution standpoint, in extremities, there was a network of independent distributors who we could talk to and immediately start getting feedback from, and then subsequently roll out to, that enabled us to also have that commercial side. So when you have the clinical benefit as well as the commercial infrastructure, that comes together and makes it a great place to start.
Can you break down the makeup of OssioFibers, biocompatible mineral fibers, and why that's been so successful in tackling the clinical challenge that you're addressing with the company?
Sure. So OssioFiber built its mineral fibers out of a class of materials that's been around orthopedics for quite a while, which is typically known as bioglasses. These are silica-based mineral compositions, which have been used as bone graft and bone fillers going back at least 20 or 30 years. And there's quite a bit of research that's been done on this class of materials in terms of both its kind of bone attractiveness, how it attracts the ingrowth of bone, osteoconductivity, as well as actually having antimicrobial impact. So we knew that this family of materials was very functional in the bony environment. And what we had to build on top of that was a way to get the mechanical result that we were seeking. And that was essentially taking these materials, upping the silica content to the point where you could actually make fibers, and then rolling it into a composite production process that allows you to get the mechanics that we have today.
Gotcha. How did you address the technical challenge of creating an absorbable implant with the mechanical strength to achieve bone fixation, um, especially under the significant stress of the body in the foot and ankle in some of these high stress areas?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of it in the early days came to building the right architectures, the right structures from these fibers that would give you, a good amount of mechanical strength. But honestly, we weren't able to get all the way there. We were able to get to about 60% of titanium, which is still fantastic for a non-permanent implant. But obviously, the surgeons are used to titanium, and so that next jump we had to do through design. And so some of the aspects of the design that we do in our products helps them get that last mile. For example, our screws would typically have thicker wall thickness than a titanium screw to compensate for that slight gap in underlying mechanical properties.
Gotcha. Um, many procedures in orthopedics achieve excellent results. Um, how does your technology fit into the efforts to making good outcomes excellent, or even better than they are today? It's just, I think there's a movement in orthopedics to um, improve on what's already working, and how does OssioFiber fit into to those efforts?
Yeah, again, another great question. So that really comes down to strategy of where you start off, and so we, being Ossio, believe that every surgery would be better with OssioFiber. But we definitely try to focus on the areas where the clinical data says that there is a problem. So if you have a removal rate in the 20s or 30s of percent, those are very high percentages that if a patient's going to go into a surgery and it's quite likely that they're going to have that removed, obviously being able to provide them OssioFiber brings additional benefit. Pediatrics is an area that really jumps to mind, and you'll be seeing some really great news on the pediatric front from Ossio soon, where a lot of these pediatric surgeries have nearly 100% removal rates of metal hardware. And so if you can avoid those second surgeries, it becomes a no-brainer. Um, Also, we look at areas where maybe you wouldn't have been able to go with a metal implant for all kinds of reasons. For example, in the subchondral space, you might be very nervous to get into the joint or even get too close to the joint with a metal implant, but you'd be willing to go in there with an OssioFiber implant since you know that it's going to go away and actually the bone around it's going to remodel nicely. So we've definitely tried to focus on areas where there's a specific benefit of the technology. Though obviously, even in your basic orthopedics, we think it's always beneficial to have something that will go away. We try to prioritize areas where we have a really big clinical differential.
And can you talk in a little more detail about how the design of osteofiber allows it to provide that initial fixation, but then the remodels into bone? Just walk me through that process in terms of the design of it and the makeup of it.
Sure. So what's really cool about our technology is that from a remodeling standpoint, it largely has to do with the composition, which is the fibers, which are held together with some biopolymer. But from a mechanical standpoint, each and every implant is designed differently. So with like a metal or a PEEK or any material that's been out there before, they are what you call isotropic. They are materials that the mechanical properties are the same in every direction. Whereas a fiber reinforced system, such as OssioFiber, requires that the fibers be laid out specific to the axis of mechanical force or mechanical load that that implant is going to see. What that means is with the screw, you're going to need to make sure that you have some helical reinforcement because that screw is going to be screwed in. With the staple, you have to make sure that you have really great reinforcement around the shoulders of the staple because that's where they're going to flex. So every implant has its own needs, and we have to look at the mechanical analysis of that geometry of implant and then make sure that we're maximizing the reinforcing aspect of the fibers in the area of mechanical need.
Um, we talked about the trend of making great procedures better. What about also how you're fitting into? There's a movement to um, find less invasive ways to treat joints and repair bone while preserving the body's biology. I think that's an important movement in orthopedics throughout all specialties. How do you guys fit into that?
Yeah, perfect example for that would be minimally invasive bunion surgery. So we did not invent minimally invasive bunion surgery. It's been around for now a couple decades, really started in Europe and more recently has become popular in the US. And this is a way to fix a bunion with a very, very small incision, and the results have been great. Now we just come along to that surgery and we say, hey, You can do all the same minimally invasive technique, but now you're not even going to be left with anything left behind. So it's almost taking that to the next level. It's almost like minimally invasive surgery 2.0. So we take the technique that has been developed around the minimally invasive procedure, and we also give you the back end of nothing left behind. So I think it's just a perfect synergy for what we're doing.
Now, surgeons, traditionally have been trained on um, metal implants. What has been the biggest hurdle or um, communication needed to get them to trust a non-permanent implant, or are they, interested in and willing to try something new?
Yeah, no, that's also a important part of introducing a new product, which is, yeah, surgeons will typically feel most comfortable with what they've trained on. It's just natural. That's what you learn. That's what you're doing. And so, as much as possible, we do try to mirror the procedures and the techniques and not require any changes of technique. However, it is not always possible. Obviously, OssioFiber is different than metal in a couple of ways. For example, it's not sharp like metal. It doesn't cut as well as metal does. So, when you're looking for like a self-drilling screw, that's something that we would not be able to offer. So we typically try as hard as we can to get as close as we can to the standard of care from a technique standpoint. But sometimes we will have to have small gaps where we will need to train surgeons to jump over that gap. And typically the advantages of working with a biointegrative material are what provide enough incentive to make that extra effort to do the procedure with OssioFiber.
So that'd be great interest to bone zone readers. Is how did you navigate the regulatory pathway with this novel technology? That's always a challenge, and how did you guys address that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one you have to think about very carefully when you're bringing any new product to market these days. It took us about 5 years to get the go ahead from FDA. Many conversations back and forth with the FDA, specifically around biocompatibility. Obviously, they're always very sensitive to new materials and new families of materials. And so we did a tremendous amount of work, animal studies, chemical characterization studies, to answer all of their questions, and they had many questions, and we were eventually able to get them over the hump. But the good news is that once we got over that initial hump with the material, because the material that we use is the same throughout all of our implants, we have not had to go through that pathway again. And since then, we've had something like 15 or 20 additional clearances. So FDA, I think, once they were able to resolve their skepticism that they have about any new material, have been a great partner in helping us introduce new products to the market.
The concept of owning a procedure is moving through orthopedics. Providing surgeons with everything they need to produce great outcomes. How does that goal inform your commercialization strategy?
Yeah, also fantastic point for entrepreneurs to be aware of in this space. It used to be that surgeons were used to just having toolboxes full of tools, and even when we started, we said, okay, so we'll make a 4 millimeter screw because people need 4 millimeter screws. Then we just made a bunch of screws, and we went out and sold them. But what we've learned over our time working with the field, and also learning from some of the other companies out there, is that the way the operating room works today is very efficiently. Nobody has a lot of time to start looking around for different parts. Nobody wants to do that. The time in the OR is extremely expensive. The surgeon time is extremely expensive. And so what everybody's looking for today are indication specific kits. And so we've shifted all of our development activities in that direction. And so products that you'll see coming out of Ossio now will typically be specific to an indication. And even one product like our threaded fixation nail, you might have a very similar nail for the hand, for the foot, for the knee, but each one will actually have very specific instrumentation that optimizes its use for those areas of the body. So absolutely, that is a very strong trend, and I would highly recommend that anyone introducing new products in this space comes with a indication specific kit. Otherwise, it'll be hard to get traction.
You provided great advice for people, like you said, who are entrepreneur or just maybe entering the space. What lessons have you taken from your journey that maybe you could give them, if they're starting out on theirs?
Yeah, it's a lot of lessons.
Yeah.
Obviously, everything starts from patient results, clinical results, and being able to help the patient and basically get outcomes that are going to be desirable both for the surgeon and for the patient. But in orthopedics, the specific advice that I would add is um, relationships and building out your network of relationships in the field is extremely important in orthopedics because the surgeons are very, very busy. And you might have your own KOLs who will love your product and will talk about your product. And yes, other people will listen to them. But if there's nobody in their region who they rely on and who they trust to bring them the product, it'll actually, on a day to day level, it'll be forgotten. You need to have a network that of trusted representatives that spans every area of the country and abroad that you might want to work in. So that is a really orthopedic specific advice that I would point out is before you get going any direction in orthopedics, start talking to the distributors because they really know what's going on. They know they'll be able to be successful with, and they tend to be a great source of knowledge.
I don't want to connect a dot that's not there, but you guys just opened a facility in Florida. That's been an exciting development. Is that part of those efforts to connect with a local market and just, infiltrate um, those networks in a way that um, will help your company grow? Can you comment on that facility and what that means for your company moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very excited about that. We actually had our first VIP visit last week, where we were able to bring in a few surgeons to the facility, and definitely the connections that you can build on the ground with bringing people into the facility and showing them the magic, so to speak, and is very valuable and meaningful to building the relationships and increasing relationships. So we've had, besides for having surgeons now, we've actually also had many of our distributor partners come by to see how the products are made, to really just experience the technology and the products on several different levels. So yeah, absolutely. That's really part of that. Especially as you know, the innovation for Ossio came out of Israel when we got started and where we have many of our engineers, which is great, but also the connection with the surgeons is critical. And so now having a team in the U.S. and the groups are now about the same size, Israel and the U.S. Fills out that piece and really allows you to have the connection with the field that you need.
You talked about, meeting with your distributors. Talk about the supply chain. That's also of great interest to our readers in terms of the challenges of sourcing those raw materials that you need for your unique platform technology. How have you, what challenges have you run into? How have you addressed them, and where do you stand today?
Yeah, that would have to be a much longer interview, but no, just kidding. You're only as good as your supply chain. That is the truth of the matter. And we work with several critical suppliers, and honestly, we would not be able to do what we do without them. And that applies also to raw materials, but also to, for example, instrumentation. We obviously do not manufacture in-house things like drill bits or some of the other tools that you might use in the operating room. And our biggest bottleneck historically has not actually been in creating innovative implants. It's actually been in being able to get the fully sterile instrumentation kits out to the field. And so over the years, we have worked with just a handful of manufacturers who can do that. And it's not due to their fault, but really due to a lot of global supply chain issues. For example, starting with the war in Ukraine, where it turns out that Russia and Ukraine are two of the biggest titanium manufacturers in the world. Who knew? And so all of their upstream material, everything got really slow. And so that is, if I would say before you even start the company, you need to know that your supply chain is going to be there. If you don't have strong companies, who have enough, uh, who can ride out tough times, have enough resources to support you, but also have a kind of linked strategic vision and who are um, really believe in your vision and want to be there for you, it's going to be hard to succeed. So yeah, I cannot stress that too much. I think many of the key suppliers we work with who have obviously been heavily involved in OnTech and in the orthopedic manufacturing space. But before you even get started, go meet with all the relevant companies. Find the ones who share your vision, who can be at the right scale, right? Because it's the same scale is not always the same for everyone. Obviously, a company who's supplying Stryker and Ossio might not be the same scale company. And so you have to find really the companies that are going to work with you, and you don't need a ton. You don't need a ton of suppliers. You just need the right suppliers who are really going to be there for you. So I think even 2 to 3 suppliers for some of these key areas, whether it be instrumentation kits or some of the raw materials, can be sufficient for a company. But they'd have to be the right one, and so can't say too much about that.
It's great. Yes, thank you, and thank you for the OmTech plug. We appreciate it.
It happens to be a really good meeting. It's like to kind of get your feet wet and see what's going on.
Appreciate it. Yes, we agree. We agree. You talked about instrumentation sets. Are you guys being intentional? We're hearing, that um, as cases move to the ASC, they might not have the reprocessing capabilities of a larger hospital. This streamlining sets, we talked about owning the procedure, just having everything ready for the surgeon, but also, focused on what they actually need in that setting. Is that part of your strategy moving forward with cases moving to the outpatient setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually creates an interesting conflict between, on one hand, everybody wants these fully disposable, ready to go kits. On the other hand, everybody wants low pricing.
Yeah.
Now, so it's interesting because it obviously puts the challenge on us not only to have the instrumentation kits that they want that are fully disposable, ready to go, but also to be able to get them and sell them at a price that the ASC wants to pay. So this is the challenge today, and I think any of the instrumentation manufacturers you talk to, I know they're working really hard to try to figure out any which way to bring costs down so that we can get this stuff to the OR at the prices that they can pay. So there's definitely a challenge there, and that comes down to a certain amount of expertise in instrument design, and that's why you have to work with the experts who really work on these types of instruments, because they've already kind of been through the loop a couple of times and are able to bring those costs down to the point where you can source the instrument kits at a price that you'll actually be able to supply them to the OR at the right price, because the reimbursement has not gone up in recent years. If anything, it's gone down. And so you have to really be very competitive and with your pricing. And so yeah, it's kind of those two trends that come together, that for us as a manufacturer and for all of our suppliers, that's the challenge that we deal with every day.
We were at Canaccord this year, and I know your team was there as well, and there were some really great advances presented in the sports medicine space.
Sure.
Tell me about some of the opportunities that lie in that area for your platform technology, and how those opportunities will allow you to expand your product portfolio.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so after starting in foot and ankle, we actually kind of got drawn into sports because some of the products we had made for foot and ankle just started getting used in sports. But as we've gotten more into that field, I get more and more excited by it, because historically, there's been joint replacement is a huge part of the orthopedic field, obviously. And sports medicine is really centered around this idea of joint preservation. So, maybe we don't need to jump quite as quickly to the replacement or what's known as arthroplasty. Maybe we can save that joint. Maybe we can help you use your natural joint for another couple of years to buy you more time, so that even if you have arthroplasty, you're doing it on a healthier joint, or you won't have to go through a revision to the arthroplasty. So that field is very, very exciting, and there have been tremendous breakthroughs, as you said, in recent years. So we've recently done a lot of work around the joints, whether it be tibial tubercle osteotomies, what we call knee bar, which is subchondral bone restoration, or a variety of other techniques, mostly around the knee for right now. Obviously, we're a small company, so we can't do everything all at once. But we've found that there is a strong movement among doctors and, especially knee doctors who might even do arthroplasty, but to try to offer their patients other options up front so that they can save their knee for longer. They can preserve the knee for longer. So that, yeah, it's a very, very exciting space. There are a couple other companies who are doing really cool stuff that's been complementary to us. We see our products used together with some other technologies very frequently, more, let's say, some of the soft tissue augmentation or things like that. And I think that the this kind of idea of regeneration and using regenerative technologies to preserve the joints is that trend is going to be very strong in the coming years for sure.
No, absolutely agree. You're right. Um, Along those lines, what are next steps for your company? What's your forward-looking strategy, and how are you tying into those macro trends that we've discussed earlier? The personalization of surgery, the joint preservation, personalized procedures, and absorbable implants. What's next, and what can you reveal about what you're looking at in the next 5 years?
Yeah, no, sure. This is a conversation we have not infrequently internally since when we got started, we were just like, well, if we could build this thing to the point where we're doing, 1 million or two a month in sales, we're doing a great job. But obviously we've blown past that and now we actually are, growing into a real company. So I think you'll actually see Ossio start to round out the portfolio beyond our historical just having OssioFiber based systems. And as I said, perhaps tacking on some aspects of soft tissue augmentation would be a good thought, or some more kind of suture technologies, things that complement our portfolio of biointegrative implants. Really with the focus on the sports procedures or joint preservation procedures, since that is where we see the market going. We will continue to introduce new implants for fusions like in foot and ankle. Just, they've been very successful and we'll continue to do that. But I think in terms of expanding, especially in terms of external innovations, it would probably be more around the soft tissue and joint preservation space. So I think you'll see us expanding our portfolio, and we basically feel like we can compete with anybody in the joint preservation space, and so we're inclined to be able to offer as comprehensive of a portfolio as we can. As I said, first around knee, but at some point, expanding to other joints as well.
Great. And last question, I'll let you go, is just what excites you about where you are as a company and the future of orthopedic care in general? What what gets you out of bed? What makes you excited to just attack each day and know the role that Osseo is playing in advancing patient care?
Yeah, so historically, orthopedic surgeons have been thought of as carpenters. It's kind of been the joke. Oh yeah, but in recent years, again, to quote Scott Sigman, who says this all the time, there's really been more of a move to orthopedic surgeons being biologists. To thinking about the biology, and so what we're doing just comes in and matches that perfectly. And so what excites me on a day-to-day basis is you're out there, you're talking to the docs. They have, great ideas of how we can preserve tissue, how we can, get these patients mobile. And as an engineer by training, which is where I come from, to be able to come and be like, oh yeah, oh for sure, we can do that. We can, and to work with the surgeons to further patient care is really what's exciting. And as I said, not everybody has figured that out yet. That we're now in the biologic age of orthopedics, but it's happening. It's a transition that's happening right now. That you see it. There's definitely some folks who are already all in. Some folks are 10 to 15% in. Some are 50% in. But it's coming. And every conference you go to, you hear more and more about orthobiologics and tissue preservation, and whether it be meniscus or ACL or all these areas that we play in, and that's very exciting. So I think we've come along at a very good time relative to where the field is. If you were around 100 years ago, people would be like, "But metal's amazing," but that's not where we are at. I mean, the conversations you have, most of the surgeons themselves have recognized some of the shortfalls of the materials that we've had until now. And so being able to be there to have the conversations and create innovation, my job at Ossio is a chief innovation officer, and I couldn't be more happy with that as a job where I get to go out every day and basically talk to surgeons in the field and innovate with them, and that's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and insights. It was great spending a few minutes with you to learn about you and your company. We appreciate all you do, and congratulations on the growth. Thanks to Omtech for sponsoring this episode.